Hey guys. Very lovely place here. Yeah, so the title of the presentation is called How to Grow to 500 People Without Going Too Insane. I don't think you can get on this startup journey without getting a little bit mad. First, I wish I had taken a picture of the city in the summer. I was told the weather is always like this. I don't think that was true necessarily. But I really want to give some credit to the local scene here, and in particular the guys, if there was anybody from Invest Lithuania. That was, as the gentleman said, we just starting an office here, and we were looking at quite a number of different places to open an office, and I really think, I'm sure the people who are here are aware of a lot of things that can be better, but I think that things were really great, and I was quite impressed by how the city and how the organizations were just welcoming us. So, like, I think the local scene should give itself a big hand for that. So the story that I'll tell you is the story of going from an idea, the story of starting your company, and turning the startup into a scale-up. And I more or less looked like this when I started the company 10 years ago. And we went from this journey where initially it was just me, where I went to my cousin, my dad's cousin, and I said, I need $150,000. I had this idea for a company, and he said, okay, you can start with getting 15. And then we were on it to today, to being here, opening an office, having offices on many continents, and I think that there are a lot of things to be learned, like to be taught and to learn from in that journey. So what I'll do is I'll tell my journey and then draw some lessons on that as we go through the stage of the company. Just quickly, this is not going to be a big talk about Trustpilot. I still want to just spend a couple of minutes telling you about it, just so that you have an idea about who I am and what it is that we do. So Trustpilot is just like TripAdvisor, where you can go and read and write reviews, only it's for companies in the online world. So if you consider buying furniture from a website, do you get this designer chair? We can tell you what other companies think, what other customers think about it. And if you're selling in the online world, you can use us to show that you deliver a great customer service. You can use us to show that you're a trusted company. So just to give you an idea of the magnitude of this, we have around 30 million reviews, growing with about 1 million a month. Those reviews are being displayed probably 2 billion times in a month. Every day we are in, I think we're shown in 0.2% of all Google searches globally all the time. We have 160,000 companies on the profile, growing with around 1,000 a month. And we've raised quite a lot of money over the days to build this. And the basic idea is that people want to know what other people think. And there are so many opinions, so how can we show that in a structured way? How can we show that in a way where you can trust the opinions and make it easy for you to make decisions? So the journey we've been on is that I started the company 10 years ago, and then initially we weren't really any good. We were just fooling around a little bit, trying to figure out how do you build a company. And then around 2010, we started to feel, hey, we're on to something, and then things really accelerated. So in 2012, we raised 4 million, the year after 12 million, the year after 25 million, and the year after 73 million. And you can also see the development with all the offices. So going through steps like that, you make a ton of mistakes. I think in our case, some things went incredibly well. I'll talk about some of those things. And that allowed us, on the other hand, to make 10 mistakes which would normally have killed any other company. I'll talk about those as well. So zooming back, like this is the original business plan. No, it's not, but I thought this was more or less the way I thought about starting a company 10 years ago, when I was 24 years old. So you said this says business and go-to-market plan. 1, build a world-changing product. So I think that we had estimated that would take about 3 months. And number 2, it would say get PR and go viral. So I'd said like that takes 3 months also. And then I could read in blogs like TechCrunch, then what would happen was normally that you'd get bought by somebody like Google, and you'd get $1 billion. So we started by building a toolbar. You could install it in Internet Explorer. And as a side note, we also did this website where you could add your own opinion about sites you were visiting. And so that went well. We had the product. I think it took us 4 months from when we started. And I thought, okay, this is going according to plan. And so we started on step two, like get PR and go viral. So we were four kids, and so we decided that we would call every newspaper in Denmark where we started it. And the thing about Denmark, I don't know if people who are from small countries can relate to this, but in small countries in the summer, not a lot is going on. And so we called every newspaper in the country, and by day 4, we were on page 17 with a tiny little note in one of the free newspapers. And so I thought, okay, it's difficult to get PR. But then the day after, I'm at a family party, I've gotten a few drinks of champagne. Out of the blue, a journalist is calling me. I'm half tipsy. I have never spoken with journalists before. And so I'm making some pretty juicy quotes. And like speaking in a pretty bombastic language. And as I said, like nothing else is going on. So I'm talking with him for an hour and a half. And after that, we say, so I'm asking him, so is this something you're going to print? And he says, so Peter, unless something happens with the Prime Minister, you're going to be on the front page tomorrow. And so then we were, the day after, we really were on the front page of the largest newspaper in the country. And that gave us, I think, 25,000 visits on the first day. And we sort of became the talk of the town. There was this new website would put justice to the internet. And then I thought, wow, this is easy. This is going super easy. The trouble with it, can any one of you remember what was on the front page of the newspaper yesterday? Anyone? Probably not, right? There's a reason if you go to London, they use it to when you get the fish and chips, they usually pack it in the newspaper from yesterday. So it's the first day we had the 25,000, the second day we had 2,000 visits, and the third day we had 200, and on day 4 we had 2. And the business model at the time was Google AdWords. And whenever we had 1,000 visits, we would get €1. So in a month, I could buy myself a small pizza. On a good month, maybe also get a small Coca-Cola. And that's when I realized, like, hey, this is actually going to take a long time. This is not so easy. And I recall speaking with other entrepreneurs about this, and so I think the first lesson here is that from getting that initial PR blast until we actually got a real business model and having the first customer, that took us 2 years. Where I was going for €0 every month. And then I spent 9 months sort of, you call it cold calling, dialing for dollars, calling companies, selling them, hey, we have this very, very basic solution for your business. And I'd spent 9 months calling companies every day. It's like, I don't know how many of you have tried to call companies that have never heard about you before, but it's a pretty brutal experience. So I think as a rule of thumb, what most people fail to realize is that it takes 10 years to build a business. That's a good, I think many people, they greatly underestimate the time where you have to go for almost no money and the time it takes you to get it right the first time, in particular when you're young and when you're inexperienced. The thing is, like, if you look at this one, like, what do these 3 have in common? We have the Pope, Kevin Systrom, the founder of Instagram, and Justin Bieber. And what they have in common is that it's equally likely for you to get a life where you either become the Pope or the founder of Instagram or Justin Bieber. right? That's how rare it is to do something like Instagram. But the reason you read about all these overnight successes is because it's incredibly unusual. For most companies, it just really isn't like that. I can recall when we were around 150 people, and I read about Instagram starting and then being acquired by Facebook for $1 billion, and they were 14 people at the time, and I think they spent 18 months on it. And I was looking around at my 150 people, and I was just thinking, what are we doing? And I recall looking at two of the salespeople trying to get the printer to print. They didn't realize that they had not pulled the electrical plug into it. And I thought, okay, we're just not as smart as the Instagram guys. But I think most companies, you need to spend a lot of time to get the initial product market fit right. The other experience we had was that initially, as I said, the idea was you could install a toolbar in Internet Explorer, and this toolbar would tell you what other people thought about the site you were visiting. And then as an afterthought, we built the website where we said, hey, you can also just leave your own opinion. So then what we found out a year after was that my dad told me, hey, Peter, I uninstalled the toolbar. I don't like it. So we thought that everybody would love the toolbar. Nobody loved the toolbar. But the idea that you could share your own opinion on a website, everybody loved that. So the reality is that you're really just exploring the market. I think that's a grand reality. People often ask, so how did you come up with this? And people sort of expect that you imagine what the company is today back in the day. I think that's the case for very, very few people. That's how when you're speaking with the media, you say, oh, this is how we came up with it, or when you're telling it to investors, you say, hey, this is what we are today. I think the reality is that most people, most businesses, they have to go through many iterations where in reality what they're doing is that they're saying, there's something about this market. There's something here that's interesting. In our case, we said, people are sharing so many opinions on the internet. Companies need a way to show that they're a great place to buy from. Consumers need to know what other people think. What kind of product can we do that will help to serve that need? And then what we've become today is probably hundreds of ideas, hundreds of things we tried that we then discarded. A little bit like water running down a hill. It is much more like that process, where I think the important thing is, there are two things that are important. The one thing is to get started. I probably met 50 people who said, oh yeah, I had that idea. And the big difference between me and them is I did something and they didn't. And the second thing is, you got to pick the right market, because the market always wins. This is really important. The market will beat any team, and the market will beat any idea. So what do I mean with that? When we started the business, it was in 2007. I did not have a Facebook profile. I didn't have a LinkedIn profile. I didn't know if Twitter was even founded. And then what happened is that first of all, Google decides that user-generated content is all the rave. That you can see, this is an example of a search where you search for a company and there are reviews on search result 1, number 2, sorry, not number 2, that's an ad, and number 3 and number 4. So basically the entire front page is just reviews. What's happening also is industry after industry after industry is going online. So if you think about the increase in e-commerce over the last 10 years, that's been enormous. So the market was growing much faster than we could serve it. You see industries like companies like Uber, companies like Airbnb, where these companies are really trust-enabled, in the sense that when I live in New York, I live in a stranger's apartment. That would never happen 10 years ago, right? When I take a car, I drive in a stranger's car. So the trust economy really took place at the same time that we launched the business. We were, if you will, a part of it. And what we're doing is that we're giving the same power of trust to all the businesses out there who are seeing that in all these new markets. What's happening is that trust is changing. I don't think people think about this in a way, but think about that. Would you buy a book without checking the reviews on Amazon? Probably not. It becomes second nature, right? Would you go to watch a movie without checking what other people thought about it? Probably not. Would you go to a restaurant without checking the reviews? Probably not. So imagine if you could do a graph with all the opinions being shared online on the internet 10 years ago and until today. Imagine if you had a little Lego brick where you could say, one Lego brick, you stack it on top of the other Lego bricks every time an opinion was shared. Imagine the growth of that curve. So we did a scan of the European internet in 2007, where we scanned, we created some search robots and we created an overview of all the opinions being shared about companies in Europe. And in 2008, there were 30,000 reviews. That was it. In the US, there were probably 60,000, and in the entire world, maybe a total of, say, 120,000. That's not a lot. And today, on Trustpilot, in a day, we're generating more than was on the European internet in 2007. So there was no way that, I was not smart enough to predict that that would happen, but I was smart enough to say something will be going on here. The second thing that then happened is this Cambrian explosion in abundance of choice and of information, where I think you can relate to this. When you go on Facebook, when I open my Facebook, I no longer really like it because this is this confusing explosion of opinions, where 5 years ago, I would be a bit of a techno-optimist, and I would think more information would be good and more opinions would just be good. And today, I think that the sum of all those opinions makes it difficult to actually find what your own opinion should be. It makes it difficult to find what's true. And when you used to have this situation in the supermarket where you could buy 50 of this different toothbrushes, taking that to the internet, that number became 50 million different toothbrushes. So I think that now there's so much information, there's so much choice, that as a species, we need a new way to make decisions. Now, all those things, like companies going online, opinions being shared, choice becoming confusing, all those things happened right when we started the business and just accelerated until afterwards. So I think that's really an example of us being a tiny little boat catching a very, very big wave. And I think if you are, the lesson that I'm drawing from this is that if you're thinking about your own business, if you're thinking about starting your company, I really cannot overemphasize the importance of thinking these long-term trends through and thinking about how can I position myself in a way where I'm going to catch the big market. If you catch a very big market, it's okay that you're 24 years old, that you basically have no experience, that you don't know how to code, that you don't know what you're doing, because there's still so much opportunity. Whereas I'm meeting much more experienced people working in a much less attractive market who will never become nearly as big as this company just because the market isn't there. So, pick the right market. That's a big conclusion of mine. So now, becoming a little bit more practical and talking about the more nitty-gritty stuff of actually building a company. There's a couple of advices I have here. So one is, I think most companies spend 1% of their time on recruiting, and then they spend 99% of the time dealing with the fact that they only spend 1% of the time on recruiting. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're working in a business, I'd say, in particular, if you're the CEO, you should obsess over recruiting. I think as the CEO, you should spend minimum 10% of your time on recruiting. I think you should obsess over the processes you have on recruiting. And I think if you're an investor or if you're a board member and if you're dealing with somebody like me, like a young entrepreneur, you need to obsess in how you introduce those processes and that experience into your team of entrepreneurs. Like I still don't think I've met a company that takes recruiting seriously enough. The second part I'd like to say is that there's a very big difference between the early stage employees and the late stage employees. When you're looking at hiring your first crew of people for your business, you really want to think of everybody coming into your business like people that could have landed on America's East Coast 300 or 400 years ago and just gotten on a mission and say, hey, you have to get west. And sometimes something like this would get in their way, and sometimes things wouldn't go according to plan. And you really have to say, how would they deal with that? So if you're hiring one of your first, I'd say probably one of your first 50 people in particular, maybe even up to the first 200 people, I think the number one question is, would you like this person to be with you on a trip 300 years ago in America from going west? How would they deal with unexpected situations? How do they deal with a total lack of procedure, with a total lack of structure? How do they deal in situations where nothing is working and where everything has to be built from scratch? And then the flip side of that, and also just can you be bothered to go through a trip like that with these persons? Because I think the rule of thumb as a startup is that things will not go according to plan and things will go wrong. And so the thing is, if you really like each other and if you trust each other and if you have that mindset, then it can actually be a fun journey. If you don't like each other, it's not. But then the flip side of that is that your early stage employees, as you're then going from the startup to the scale up, I think the recognition is that what I've seen again and again is that those people who are very, very good at crossing the continent, when you're then building more of a professional army, where you need people to go in synchronization and be able to follow orders, your early employees are actually just not the right people for that job. It's a very, very different breed of people. And so don't expect everyone to scale in your business. I think it's very normal that when you grow from 10 to 100 to 500, that you'll see some of your early heroes just don't fit into a bigger structure where it's more process and more discipline that's required. And what I've really learned is that when we talk about early employees that don't scale, the founder is also an early employee. So I think if you work with founders, or if you are a founder, really this know yourself becomes so important. On the one hand, as a founder, I think you should be very humble about what you can and what you cannot do. At the same time, though, and I think this is really true for everybody. Like ask yourself as a founder, what is it that gives you happiness? What is it that you can do better than nobody else? But really also I'm probably always 9 months or 12 months behind from where I need to be in terms of we're 500 people today, and I'm probably developed as a manager into managing a company with 250 people that we were a little while ago. And when we were 100 people, I was probably, experience-wise, equipped to manage 20 or 50 people. So what does that mean? So it means, first of all, which I'll talk about later, is that you need to surround yourself with some very, very experienced people. And I'll just give some easy tricks into hiring those. At the same time, though, I also think some founders sometimes become too humble. And there's talk about this imposter syndrome. And I think as a founder, it's very important that you also realize that there are some things that you can do better than anyone. Like you live and bleed the company more than anybody. You dream about the company more than anybody. You can really express what it is you want with the company better than anybody. You sort of embody the company. And then there are probably a few other things that you also do really well. So at the same time, be proud about what it is you're bringing to the table as a founder, because that spirit that you have as a founder, no fancy executive that you hire who can do the spreadsheet or the PowerPoints better than you can give that sort of undefined spirit to the business. And I really want the founders here to take pride in bringing that. So this is the sketch of the CEO job. I think what the responsibility should be ideally is set strategy, set the team, and get money. Really, that's it. I think as a CEO, if you do much more than that, you're looking at your job in the wrong way, or you have the wrong team around yourself. The reality, though, is that that's almost always the case. What happens extremely rarely is that the CEO will do one of those three things. What actually happens is that the CEO will do everything that the CEO thinks that nobody else can do. That's just how things usually play out. So then you need the top team. And what I did very early on was that I hired people who were 20 or 30 years older than me, and who had that much more work experience. I think as a founder, when you do that, it's very important that you give them space, but it's also very important that they give you space. So when you interview the top guns, you really want to make sure that they can give the founders space. It's also, I think, the mistake I see very many early stage startups do is that they hire executives from companies that are too big. Or that they hire executives that, for example, like, let's say you ran a 6,000 people division at some enormous company. Chances are you'll do more damage in a startup than you'll do good. They just don't get it, usually. It's very rare that the big company people get what it's like to work in a startup. So always when I'm hiring, or when I recommend a hire to a startup, I'm asking the question, what is it that this person is going to do on their own? For example, the CFO, can you do your own spreadsheet? The head of marketing, can you do your own Google AdWords campaigns? I think if you're in a startup and you're hiring people who can only work through others, usually you're hiring too far ahead of the curve. It's all about the actual hands-on experience. What will they do? And finally, also, I find that if you spend less than 4 months bringing an executive on board, then either you've figured something out that nobody else has figured out in terms of running a recruiting process, or you're making a mistake. For a normal company, you can probably bring on one person to your C-level team every 4 to 6 months. If you do it faster, I think what we did was that we got a lot of money, and then I thought, oh, we needed the very experienced people, and then you run a big risk that the team structure, that the trust you've built between your team blows up because you're expanding it too fast and you're not running through the proper recruiting structures. So I'd say, as a founder, spend a religious amount of time on going through the process of ingraining the top management people in your team, and take them one at a time. Finally, also, something that shifts is that it becomes a lot more about process, systems, and data as you scale. I think initially, if you're an early stage startup, my advice is obsess over the product and don't think about anything else. Who cares about Salesforce? Who cares about ticket systems? Like, nobody. It's all about the product. It's about getting the product market fit. However, then when you scale, when you want to go from, say, 100 million in revenue to 500 million in revenue, it becomes a lot more important with your systems, with your data, your processes, and how you work. So thinking about, for example, do your teams work with objectives? Are the teams self-governed? Are the employees able to say what's the right thing to do without asking the CEO? Obsessing over that and doing that early on becomes more important than the next 5 features you can build or the next product capability. And I think most companies, they don't think, or most founders, just as a rule of thumb, I've never met a person in a business, or met a few people, but they're rare, that thinks that integrating a salary managed system is fun or sexy. I've never met anybody who thought that figuring out the right integration between Salesforce and your product is interesting. But that's really, it's those things where my rule of thumb is that once you've figured the product market fit, you want to treat the systems and the processes and the data with exactly the same priority as you're treating your product. Most people don't get that balance right. They don't get the balance to scale. And then finally, I think, so the realization is this takes time, and when you start thinking about processes and how do we work and all these things, you also realize that you've gone from becoming a founder CEO who was running a startup to something that's more of a job. Like the 5th time you've had your salary talk with your CFO, it's more a job than it's a calling, right? It becomes less interesting. So a very, very strong recommendation to someone who wants to spend 10 years building a company is to early on really find your why. I mean, so many people where they've started a business because they had a better idea for a new mousetrap. They thought this is going to be something I can make some money on and maybe it can grow. And I think that's a lot of fun the first year, it's a lot of fun the second year, but when you're 8 years in, you really, really need to understand why you're doing this. What is it that's driving you? And the earlier you can come up with those reasons, the more they will stay with you for the rest of that journey. My time is up. Thanks for listening. Are there any questions? Cool. This was fun.
Questions. I have a question.
You have a question?
Yeah, of course I do. A lot of questions, actually. Okay, so you were talking about that it takes time, to get to initial product market, that it takes time to develop a business that actually makes money. But there's a bunch of entrepreneurs who want to succeed really quickly without depleting their stamina. And so they move on to the next idea pretty quickly. Is it always a faulty attitude, do you think? Or not?
To move on?
Yeah.
No. It's very, very hard, right? Because, and I meet people, they have a business, and it's not really going anywhere. And in my case, I met a lot of people who told me, Peter, maybe you should just get a job. And I was very stubborn, and I like, no, I know I'm onto something. So I took another year, and then another year, and then another year, and then it paid off. And then I met like people who did that, where it was just like obvious that you shouldn't do it. So I think it's very hard to come up with a rule of thumb on like when do you quit and when do you not. The one thing I would say though is that without becoming a total, you can say Steve Jobs asshole. I think most people can't pull that off because they forget that they're not Steve Jobs. But I find a lot of people are too nice when they're speaking with entrepreneurs. People say, oh, I have this idea where we can do a social network for cats. And most people say, oh, that's a great idea. That's really interesting. And when in reality, they think it's never going to work. So something that I've really thought about many times is that I probably met 20 founders where they asked me, what do you think about this? And I didn't want to offend them by saying I thought it was the worst idea I ever heard. So I just said, yeah, okay, might work. And I meet them 18 months later and they put a loan on their house and they owe a lot of money and the company went bankrupt and I thought, okay, maybe I should have been less nice. So I'd say if you meet people in that situation, I think it's hard to tell them what to do, but just be brutally honest.